In this Unreal Engine 5 stamina system tutorial, we are going to create a stamina bar for the player. The player will spend stamina when sprinting, and it will automatically regenerate when the player is not sprinting anymore. The player will also stop sprinting if the stamina bar reaches 0. In this tutorial, you can use your own project to implement this stamina bar. However, I am going to implement it in this third-person template. So I'm going to go ahead and select this and give it a name. And remember to have Blueprint set as your programming language and go ahead and click on Create. Inside of here, the first thing I'm going to do is click on the content drawer and click on Dock in Layout so this content browser stays up all the time. If you're interested in Unreal Engine 5 game development courses, you can visit my website pixelhelmet.com. Here I make both single player and multiplayer courses with videos being released daily in 4K resolution, and I'm available 24/7 on my website or Discord server to help you out. All the links are in the description below. Now, before we do anything, let's create the UI and get that out of the way. So I'm going to right click here, make a new folder, call this one UI. And inside of here, let's right click, go to user interface and create a widget blueprint. Now select this one here and let's call this one widget blueprint. And I'm just going to call it main as my main UI. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And inside of this user interface up here, before you do anything, you have to create a canvas. So you can click on this canvas, click and drag it into the hierarchy here. And you can see we have created this canvas. So we have to do this before we do anything else. Now, as for the stamina bar, you can write progression bar or progress bar, this here, clicking and dragging this into the canvas panel. And here we have the progress bar. Now you can either click and drag it into here or you can click and drag it into the canvas panel. That is up to you. You can see that's the same thing. Now, as for my stamina bar, you can see you can click and drag these sides to make it larger. You can also do that here to the side where you can see the size of it, size X and size Y. So I'm just going to just do something like this, very, very random for now. And I'm going to place it down here. So I just want my stamina bar to be at the bottom left of my screen. Now you can see we have an anchor point here. So what this means is if I make my screen smaller and smaller, the stamina bar is actually going to be pushed towards that end of the screen. And I don't want that. I want my stamina bar to be down here. So what you can do is click on the stamina bar or progress bar here, and you can click on the anchors up here and select this bottom left anchor. Now you can see when my screen gets smaller, just like that, if the player in the game is going to minimize their screen like this, it's actually going towards this side of the screen, and this is what I want. Okay, so over here in the position X and Y, if you write 0, 0, you can see that it is out of the screen now. Now, in order to make it inside of the screen, you have to push it up in the Y. And you can do this here in the alignment in the Y. If you just write 1, you can see you can either write 0, 0 0.5, or 1. And if you write 1, it should be at 0, 0. It should be inside of the screen. So now you can see it's inside of the screen. Everything is correct. I'm just going to click and drag this progress bar a bit up here, and you can resize it as you like. And what you can do with this progress bar, you can see in the percent, if you click and drag and write a number, you can see you can fill this progress bar. Now I'm going to change the color, clicking on this color down here. I'm just going to change it into a yellow color. When you are satisfied, you can go ahead and click on OK. And here we have the UI for the progress bar. I'm going to change the name of it here. So clicking on the progress bar and calling it prog stamina. And we can now use it here in the graph. If you go to the graph, this is where you code the functionality of the progress bar. And here you can see it is called prog stamina, and it's a lot easier to work with if you change the name up here, because then you know what the variables are called when you work with them inside of the event graph. So inside of here, let's go ahead and delete all of those. So click and drag and select all of them, hit delete on the keyboard. And I'm going to right click, write custom events. And now I'm going to create a custom event called update stamina UI, something like that, whatever makes sense for you. Update stamina UI. And the only thing we want to do with this progress bar is we can click and drag it into here, and we can drag from this and say set percent and select this function called set percent. And the reason why we do this is, remember in the designer, if you click on the progress bar, you are setting the percent here. We want to either increase or decrease the stamina bar. So I'm going to go in the graph and take this and say set percent and go ahead and connect with the event you just made. And from this one, this input here, you can click and drag it into the event and it will automatically create an input for you. So you can either create inputs by clicking up here and changing the variable and creating it, or you can automatically create them if you drag one of the pins into the event. So for this one, I'm going to call it current stamina. Now remember, we need a percent. So if you write, for example, if your stamina is, let's say 90 or 80, this is going to not show correctly because this bar is only going from 0 to 1. It's not going from 0 to 100. So if you have a value of 80, it will keep showing full. If your value is 40, it's still going to show full because the full value is 1.0. So you have to make it as a percent from 0 to 1. So what we can do here is we have the current stamina. Let's say the current stamina is 50 right now. We have to divide it by something to get a number that is between 0 and 1. And let's click here and make a new float. Up here, select float. And for this one, let's call it max stamina. And let's take this minimum or current stamina, take it and write this symbol here. This will divide, or you can just simply write divide and select this operator. And now you have to divide this number by this number. So let's say my current stamina is 50 and I divide it by 100, which is my maximum stamina. So 50 divided by 100, that is equal to 0 0.5. So it will show correctly as 0 0.5, just like that. Okay, so this would work correctly. Max current stamina divided by the maximum stamina that you have, and this one we will drag into the percentage here, and you can go ahead and organize your code. All right, now we are finished here. Let's close down this UI, and let's go over to third person, go to blueprints, and open up my third person character. Now inside of this third person character blueprint, we have this begin play event, and this will tell us what should happen if I begin playing the game. And here we are going to add the UI. So if you have your own project, you can go ahead and add it to your begin play event. From here, I'm just going to drag after this code that they have written. I'm going to drag from here and say create widget. And if you just search for widget, this one, create widget. And we're going to select the widget we just made called WB main. Now this one is the player controller reference. So you can drag from here and write player controller and select this one called get player controller. Now that this is done, what we have to do is now drag from this and say add to viewport. Because even though you create the UI, you have to add it to the viewport in order for it to be displayed to the screen. So let's go ahead and click on compile up here. And let me minimize this and click on play to see if it works. And you can see it works. If I click on F11 to maximize my viewport, you can see we now have this stamina bar. However, we don't have any functionality to it, so it's not going to work just yet. But the UI is working, so let's go back to the third person character. Okay, so now let's make a button where we sprint. Let's minimize this here. Inside of this input folder, they already have made this input mapping context and also some input actions, as you can see here. I'm going to right click and create a new input action. By the way, if you're new to this system here, please take a look at my YouTube channel. I do have a in-depth video explaining how to do this. And again, you can always visit pixelhelmet.com or my Discord server and I'll help you out. So for this sprint, let's call this input action, IA sprint, hit enter, and let's go back to the input, click on the input mapping context. And as you can see here, they've already made the jump, move, and look for you. I'm going to click up here and select the sprint that we made down here. And as for the buttons, I'm just going to click here and click on shift on my keyboard, or you can click here and find it under keyboard, find the key, whatever you like to sprint with. I'm just going to sprint with my shift key. And as the triggers, I'm going to click up here and select the pressed and click up here again and select the released. So this just tells you when should this sprint be triggered. Whenever I press and whenever I release, I want to stop sprinting. And we will use that inside of the code. So go ahead and save this. And let's go back to the third person character. Inside of here, let's right click and write IA sprint. Now you have to call it whatever you called your input action. So the name of the input action, it will show as an event here. And this icon means that this is an event. Clicking on it here. And now you can see we have the input action just like the other ones. We have our own now with this sprint. Now, before I do anything, let's drag from this boolean and write branch and then connect it to triggered. Now, what this is if I click on my shift button to sprint, it's going to play the code here from the true. If I release my shift button to stop sprinting, it's going to play the code here from the false. Now, for the sprinting, what we're actually wanting to do is we want to take this character movement component, drop it here, drag from this character movement component. You can see in the character movement component, you have something called the max walk speed. And the max walk speed is simply how fast you're running. So dragging from this and say set max walk speed. This is what we're basically wanting to change. When you're sprinting, you're basically running faster. And when you're not sprinting anymore, you're walking normally. So let's connect it here. When we are sprinting, we want to put a value that is very high. For example, I'm just going to put the value of 2000. You can see normally the value is 500 when I'm walking normally. Whenever I sprint, I'm just going to put it very, very high to showcase it easier to you. And as many of you know, I don't like to write static numbers. I like to have them as variables. So I'm going to right click this here and promote this to a variable. And I'm going to call it sprint speed. And now we have it as a variable. So instead of changing the number here, we can always just click on the variable down here and change the default value of it. Now, as for the running speed here, now when it is false, meaning we have released our shift key, we want to run normally again. I'm going to click here, copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V to paste it. And then I'm going to connect it here. And instead of sprint speed, let's right click here, promote this to a variable and call it run speed instead. And for the run speed, remember you have to, it says please compile the blueprint. You have to compile to see the default value. So clicking on compile. And for the run speed, remember to set it to 500 or whatever it is for your own game. Here for this game, the character movement default is 500, so I'm going to choose that. So now if you play the game, you would see that it is actually working. If you play here and you press on shift, you can see that I'm sprinting. And if I release my shift key, you can see I'm walking normally again. So sprinting and walking normally. So everything is working correctly. Now we have to connect the stamina bar to the player. So the most important thing here is something called a timer by event. Now you have to be a little bit awake because it's actually going not to get difficult, but there are a lot of elements that we need to add for a stamina bar. Now let's drag from here and say timer by event. So you have to use this function called set timer by event. And this basically let us run code on a loop. For example, if we are sprinting, we want to keep decreasing the stamina bar. And if we are not running anymore, we want to keep increasing the stamina bar because we are regenerating stamina. So this is done by this one called set timer by event. For this one, from the event, let's drag from here and write custom event. And here we have to create a custom event. And let's just call this one update stamina. And it is a loop, so I usually just call it loop at the end. So this one updates the stamina when we are running, and it will decrease the stamina. And it is also a looping timer. And here we have to select how quick do we want to loop this. If I write 0.5, for example, it will loop 2 times a second. If I write 0.2, this code will run 5 times per second. And you can actually see that if I click here and write print string, so I just print a text to the screen and you can see what is happening. So if I compile here and I click on play and I hold shift, you can see my code is actually printing 5 times a second. So if I click on play, hold shift, it's running 5 times a second. So this timer here, I'm just going to right click and promote it to a variable. And I'm just going to call it stamina timer speed. Now we can use this variable later to calculate the stamina. And over here for this pin node, I'm going to right click and promote this to a variable and call it stamina spend timer handle. Now for this variable, we need to have it as a variable because later we want to stop this timer whenever we have stopped sprinting. So very, very important that you make this into a variable. Now for the stamina here, what we are basically wanting to do is we want to update the current stamina. So let's make a new variable down here and let's create it into a float variable. And let's call this one current stamina. Now we can hold Alt and click and drag and place it. That will set it. Instead of just clicking on set, you can hold Alt and drag it, or hold Control and drag it, and it will get and set it automatically like this. Now we have to set this current stamina. This is our ultimate goal. So how do we set this current stamina? So for the current stamina, I'm going to click on this variable, clicking on compile to see the default value. And let's say the current stamina is, for example, 100 currently. So I'm going to take this current stamina and we can drag from here and say minus or subtract and select this subtract operator. Now we have to subtract this current stamina by something. Let us make a variable called stamina spend per second. So you can choose how much stamina you want the player to spend per second when running. Now drag the stamina per spend per second into the graph, and you can drag from here and say multiply. And I'm going to multiply it with the stamina timer speed. So stamina timer speed is over here. Click and drag it and plug it into here. And now you can plug this into the current stamina and subtract it. Now what you're basically saying here is the current stamina, which is 100. And let us compile. Let's say the stamina spend per second is 5. So we are spending 5 stamina per second. And in order to calculate this correctly, because remember right now, the stamina timer speed is 0.2. So this code here is running 5 times a second right now. So if I just write stamina spent per second and connect it here without doing all of this, you can see that it's actually reducing the stamina by 5 every 0.2 seconds. So in order to tell it that I actually want to spend 5 stamina per second and not 5 stamina per 0.2 seconds or whatever you have written up here, I have to divide it by that speed that we write down here or up here and multiply it. So for example, if you say 5 is the stamina spent per second multiplied by 0.2, that will give you a value of 1. So we are spending 1 stamina per 0.2 seconds, which will also make it to 5 stamina per second. And now that we have this code, we can go ahead and connect it here and it will update correctly. Now, in order to make sure that this code doesn't go below 0, because we keep subtracting the number, and I don't want my stamina to go below 0 because this is my minimum value. So go ahead and drag from this and write clamp and select this one called clamp float. So what a clamp is, it just makes sure your number doesn't go under the value you have written here. So that my minimum stamina is 0 and my maximum stamina is, let's make a new variable called maximum stamina. So go ahead and create a new variable, call this one max stamina, and go ahead and compile. And now for this max stamina, I'm going to give it a value. Now you don't have to write 100. You can write 500 if you want. The system we are making is dynamic and you can choose whatever it needs to be here in the maximum stamina. It doesn't need to be 100. I'm going to write 100 for this tutorial. Now I can go ahead and click on compile and I can click and drag this maximum stamina into this value. So now it's going to clamp my value. My current stamina value is never going under 0 and it's also never going over the maximum allowed stamina. Go ahead and drag this now into here and now we have the code written correctly. All right, so now everything is working, and if I drag from here and write print string, and I take this and connect it into the string here to print my value to the screen, I can compile and click on play and hold shift, and you can see the value is now updating correctly when I'm sprinting. However, we now need to update the stamina bar instead of just printing to the screen. So remember in the UI, if I go back to the UI and if I go back to the graph, we wrote this one in the beginning called update stamina UI. I'm going to go back to my player here. And now we actually need a variable for this main widget that we created, because remember this event is inside of the widget. So we need a variable here. So I'm going to drag this away a bit, right click this create widget and promote this to a variable called WB main, for example. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to connect it here And I'm going to hold Alt and click here to disconnect this. And I'm just going to connect this to here to make it a bit more organized. And now we have this variable. Go ahead and click on compile. Now down here, what you can do is you can take this variable and write the name of the event that you created, update stamina UI. And drag from here, update stamina UI. And as you can see here, it's going to take two inputs because this is what we made here. It's going to take the current stamina and also the maximum stamina. And we have that as well. Drag it into here. Now we have the current stamina, maximum stamina, and go ahead and click on compile. And now if you click on play and hold shift to sprint, you can now see, if I maximize the screen so you can see, it's spending 5 stamina per second. So now it is working. However, you can see it's not stopping whenever I stop, so we have to continue writing the code. Okay, so down here, whenever I don't press shift anymore, whenever I don't sprint anymore, and actually I'm just going to push all of this code a bit away from here so you can see what's going on. I'm going to take this down here because we have to write code here as well. Whenever I stop sprinting now, I'm going to set my run speed to normal, but I also want to stop this code here. I don't want to spend stamina anymore. So again, this was very, very important that you made this variable. So you're going to use this variable now. Take this variable that we created, the timer handle get, and we can drag from here and say clear and invalidate timer by handle. This is how you stop the timer from counting anymore. And now we want to use another timer because now we want to regenerate the stamina. So drag from here again and write set timer by event. Just like before, nothing new. And let's drag from here and create another event just like before, custom event. And let's call this one update stamina regeneration. So now we're regenerating it. And I'm just going to call it loop because it is looping. Now, just like before, I'm going to set it to looping. We can just use the same variable up here so we don't have to write it here. So I'm just going to take this stamina timer speed and plug it into here. So now instead of spending stamina, we want to regenerate stamina. And again, we're just going to set this current stamina. So taking this current stamina and let's set it again just like before. So we're going to, again, take this current stamina and instead of saying minus, let's say plus. Let's drag from here and say plus because now we want to regenerate stamina. And just like before here, let's copy this and paste it down here. So we have stamina spent per second. Now let's delete this one and promote this to a variable. Let's call this one stamina regen per second. Now we're not spending, we're regenerating. And go ahead and compile. And now we have to write how much stamina do you want to regenerate per second. You can see you don't have to spend the same number as what you're regenerating. So you can even make the player spend stamina faster than what you're regenerating. So for this regenerating, I'm just going to write 5 is fine. And the stamina timer speed is just like before, 0.2. And you can go ahead and add it to this calculation. And we can add this to the current stamina. So now we are regenerating stamina. We are adding into the current stamina. And just like before, I don't want my stamina to go over the maximum stamina value. So I'm going to drag from here and write clamp, select float. The minimum value is 0 and the maximum value is this maximum stamina. And you can drag from this into here and organize the code. And just like before, you have to update the stamina UI. So I'm just going to copy this into here, just copy paste and connect your current stamina just like this. And now if I compile and I go ahead and click on play, I can see if I hold shift, I'm spending stamina. If I let go of my shift, I am actually regenerating. So holding shift will spend, releasing will regenerate. However, you can see there is a bug. Remember, you are running this timer. However, you have not stopped it yet, just like up here. So let's right click this one, promote this to a variable. Let's call it stamina regen timer handle. And let's go ahead and put it here. And now up here, whenever I hold the shift here and spend my stamina, I want to stop the regeneration because it doesn't make sense to regenerate stamina whenever you are sprinting. And I also want to make sure that I can't sprint when my stamina is 0 because you shouldn't sprint when your stamina is 0. So let me take my current stamina. I can drag from this current stamina and say not equal. So this sign here is not equal, or you can just write not equal. So if my current stamina is not equal to 0, and I can write branch. If that is true, I want to sprint. So my current stamina is not 0. I can go ahead and sprint. Now, as for this timer, we also have to stop this stamina regeneration if we are regenerating. I'm going to drag this a bit away here, take this stamina regen timer handle and say clear and invalidate. Just like before, go ahead and connect it and go ahead and take this code a bit away for it to stay organized. And here we have it. Now, if we click on play, we can now hold shift and it will spend. And if we release, it will regenerate. If I hold shift again, it will spend and so on. So let's quit this here for now. Now we are missing something. If you are sprinting and your stamina gets to 0, you don't want to sprint anymore. You want to stop the player. So take this current stamina, and remember right now we are up here where we are spending the stamina. So take the current stamina here, drag from here and write equal. Select this equal. And now when the stamina is equal to 0, click here and write the branch and connect it here. So when the stamina is 0, we basically want to take this stamina spend timer and again clear and invalidate this timer because we don't want to run this code anymore. And we want to start automatically regenerating stamina because now you're not running anymore. So to automatically start this code here, let's make a new custom event. Let's right click, make a custom event and call this one regen stamina, just like that. And go ahead and just connect it to this max walk speed because now we can run this code here. We can run all of this code before the player actually releases the button because we're just forcing the player to walk because you basically don't have stamina anymore. Now regen stamina. So up here, we can now call this event we just made called regen stamina. So we're going to stop the spent code here and we're going to run this automatically down here, the regen stamina. The same thing here, if your stamina is regenerating and it is at the maximum stamina, so if you have regenerated all of your stamina, we don't want to keep running this code. This will be unoptimized and your game will crash at some point because you're just running code without any reason. So let's take the current stamina and let's say if the current stamina is equal to the maximum stamina, then we want to stop regenerating because we're basically at the maximum stamina now. So dragging from this, writing a branch again, connecting it. And here we want to take the stamina regen timer handle and say clear and invalidate timer by handle. Now, before we finish up here, I want to make sure that the player is not spamming this timer here because the player can basically hold shift to sprint and release the shift key, like hold shift, release the shift like 3 times a second. And the player will keep running this timer without any reason before we stop it. I'm going to drag from this and take this stamina regen timer handle. And I'm going to drag here and say is valid timer handle. I'm just going to make sure that this is valid or not. And you can drag from here and write not B. This will take you to this one, not boolean, and go ahead and create this one. And now you can drag from here and write a branch and connect it to here. So we're basically saying if this stamina regen timer over here, this code here, if it is not valid and you want to actually regenerate the stamina, go ahead and create this timer, go ahead and continue the code. However, if you're already regenerating, so we have not cleared this timer, you're actually already regenerating, we don't want to do anything because you're already running this code here. We don't want the player to keep spamming it without any reason. And here you have it. Now, if I compile and I go ahead and click on play and I hold F11 and I hold shift, we are sprinting. If I release the shift, we are not sprinting anymore and we are regenerating stamina. And if it reaches 100, it will stop regenerating. Now you can see to make the bar more smooth, you can see it looks laggy when it is spending stamina. This is because of the timer, the time you have chosen it to be. So here the stamina timer speed. Instead of writing 0.2, you can write 0.05 and it will automatically update down here. So go ahead and compile. And if you click on play now and hold shift, you can now see it is more smooth and it is spending in a smooth way. Now, just be aware, optimization wise, you don't want to run this too many times. So if you don't want to write, for example, 0.001, basically you are running this code X amount of times. And if you are running this code too many times a second, this will basically use the optimization of the game and make your game lag. So I usually just like to stay up here around zero point 0.3, which is the minimum, or zero point 0.2. I don't like to go below that. So zero point 0.5 is very nice. If you can go higher, that will even make your game more optimized. So go ahead and compile. And thank you for watching this video. Again, you are very welcome to join me on pixelhelmet.com. I have a lot of game development courses for shooting games or platformers and whatever you want, even 2D games in Unreal Engine 5. Or you can join my Discord server and I will also help you out there. Remember to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.